Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new true crime video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the icebox murders. Quickly before I get into the case, I just want to say all the information I have found on this video has been from multiple different sources on the internet, such as articles and documentaries and stuff like that, so I do apologise if anything is incorrect, or if you think that I've missed something out that's really important to the case, please feel free to let me know in the comments. And without further ado, let's just get into today's case. So the murder of an elderly couple called Fred and Edwina Rogers occurred on June the 23rd, 1965 in the Montrose neighborhood of Houston in Texas. This case is known as the icebox murders because the couple's bodies were actually found in their own fridge. So 81-year-old Fred Rogers and 73-year-old Edwina Rogers were an elderly couple who lived in Houston, like I said, and they actually lived with their son, 43-year-old Charles Rogers. So on June the 23rd, 1965, Edwina's nephew Marvin became a little bit concerned about his aunt and uncle because he hadn't heard from them in a few days. He had been trying to contact them, but they just weren't responding, they weren't answering the phone or anything like that, so he was a little bit concerned. And so Marvin decided to contact Houston police just to see if anyone was around to maybe go and check on the couple. They were quite old, like I said, they were an elderly couple, so he was just a little bit concerned that something had happened to them. And so on the 23rd of June, 2 Houston police officers were sent to the house to check on Fred and Edwina. However, these police officers were ringing the doorbell several times and no one was answering the door, and they were kind of looking through the windows and they couldn't see anyone, so they were getting a little bit concerned. And so fearing that something was wrong, fearing that something had happened to this elderly couple, the police officers decided to kick their front door down. When the police officers eventually managed to get into the house, they didn't really notice anything unusual. However, no one was in the house. Fred and Edwina weren't in the house, and neither was their son Charles, who also lived with them. However, there was food on the dining room table despite no one being home, so it looked like someone intended to have a meal, eat some food, but then left. So the police officers were having a little look around the downstairs of the property just to see if anything was out of place, if anything seemed unusual, but nothing did. And so the police officers started getting ready to leave. They just kind of assumed that maybe the couple was out. However, then one of the police officers actually checked inside the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the police officer saw in this fridge just numerous pieces of unwrapped meat, just cut up meat, which were all like stacked neatly on the fridge shelves. And initially the police officers just thought this meat was some kind of pig or hog or something like that. However, as this officer was closing the door to the fridge, he glanced down to the bottom by the vegetable bin and he saw 2 human heads. And the heads were those of the elderly couple, Fred and Edwina Rogers. And the stacked up meat in the fridge that the officers previously thought was just a pig or a hog was actually the dismembered torsos and limbs of Fred and Edwina. Fred and Edwina's organs were later found in a nearby sewer by police where the killer had flushed them down the toilet. However, some of the couple's other remains have never been found to this day. The body parts that were recovered were taken for an autopsy and they were confirmed to be that of Fred and Edwina. And the autopsy actually established that Fred and Edwina had actually been murdered 3 days earlier on Father's Day on June the 20th, 1965. And so they had been in that fridge for around 3 days. The autopsy also determined how the couple had been murdered before they were dismembered. 81-year-old Fred Rogers was killed by several blows to the head by a claw hammer, and Fred's eyes had actually been gouged out by the killer, and his genitals had also been removed. Whereas 73-year-old Edwina Rogers had been beaten and then shot in the head execution style. And police determined that after the murderer had killed Fred and Edwina, he had dismembered their bodies in the upstairs bathroom. It was also established that whoever had done this to Fred and Edwina, whoever had murdered them and dismembered them, had some knowledge of the anatomy because they did it really well. They dismembered them really well. The killer had also thoroughly cleaned the house after the murders to try and get rid of any DNA or forensic evidence or traces of blood. However, there was a trace of blood leading to the couple's son's bedroom, Charles Rogers. And Charles Rogers was nowhere to be found. He wasn't in the house. As far as police knew, he hadn't been murdered as well, and he was just, nowhere to be found. In Charles's bedroom, police found a blood-stained keyhole saw, which was confirmed to be the weapon that the killer used to dismember Fred and Edwina. And because of this, and the fact that Charles was nowhere to be found, no one knew who he was, no one could contact him, he became the prime suspect in the murder of his elderly parents. So Charles Frederick Rogers was born on December the 30th, 1921 to his elderly parents, Fred and Edwina Rogers. However, it was reported that growing up, Charles never had a good relationship with his parents. Some sources online say that Charles was physically and mentally abused by his parents growing up, and he he really didn't like his parents a lot. And the house that the family lived in, that Fred and Edwina and Charles all lived in, was actually owned by Charles. It wasn't owned by Fred and Edwina, it was owned by Charles. Some of the sources online also said that Fred and Edwina would constantly steal from their son Charles. They would always take out loans in their son's name and they would just constantly steal his money. And Charles apparently had such a bad relationship with his parents that apparently he wouldn't actually speak to them, like he wouldn't communicate with them through the means of like speech and talking to them like normal families would. Apparently Charles and his parents would only speak through the means of like writing letters, so they would write notes and pass it under each other's doors. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. I did read that on a few sources, but when I read that I just thought that was so strange. Like, they live in the same house and they don't even speak. They have that bad a relationship, they just write notes to each other. Detectives theorised that maybe Charles got so tired and sick of the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his parents that he just decided to kill them. People who knew Charles personally described him as a very intelligent man. He had a degree in nuclear science and he actually spoke 7 different languages, so he was very clever, he was very intelligent. During World War II, Charles actually worked as a pilot in the US Navy, and after that he worked as a seismologist, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but basically it's the study of earthquakes. There was also speculation that Charles was a CIA agent, and there was also a conspiracy theory that maybe Charles had something to do with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This kind of conspiracy, this kind of theory was written about in a 1992 book called The Man on the Grassy Knoll. So it was kind of speculated that maybe Fred and Edwina found out about their son's part in John F. Kennedy's assassination and they threatened to tell the police or just tell people, and so he killed them to keep them quiet. However, this is just theory, this is just speculation, this hasn't been proven, it's just theory, like I said. The gruesome murder of Fred and Edwina Rogers quickly became very popular. Everyone knew about it, everyone was talking about it, and it was named by the media as the Icebox Murders because obviously they were found in the fridge. But anyway, back to Charles. So like I said, he was the prime suspect in his parents' murder because he was nowhere to be found, he hadn't been in contact. Obviously at this point everyone knew about the murders, but he just hadn't contacted anyone or anything, so he was the prime suspect. And so a search for Charles was launched and a warrant was issued for him as a material witness to the crime. However, police were never able to locate his whereabouts. He had literally just vanished. And eventually years went past whilst police were still trying to find Charles Rogers, but they just couldn't. They couldn't locate him anywhere. And so in 1975, 10 years after the murders, Charles Rogers was declared legally dead so that his estate could be probated. However, he is still the main suspect in this case. Despite him being declared legally dead, there's never been any evidence that he actually is dead, really. His body's never been found or anything like that, but he has been declared legally dead. And obviously Charles was born in 1921, so today he would pretty much definitely be dead. In 2003, 38 years after the murder, a married couple called Hugh and Martha Gardiner released a novel called The Icebox Murders. This couple had been investigating the case for years, and in their book they expressed their theory and their kind of opinion about what they thought happened to Charles Rogers. Gardiners believed that Charles did plan the murder of his parents, and he did carry out the murder of his parents for years, and then when he eventually did kill them, he fled to Mexico and was never found. And they also theorised that Charles Rogers was murdered himself in Mexico, and that's why no one has ever been able to locate his whereabouts. However, I couldn't actually find how they thought Charles was murdered or why, so I'm not really sure what made them come up with that theory. There isn't too much information about that online, but yeah. But obviously, like I've said, that is just a theory. It's a lot of theories in this case. We don't actually know what happened to Charles, whether he did actually kill his parents. I mean, it's pretty likely that he probably did, given the evidence against him and the fact that no one had ever seen him again after the murders took place, but who knows. The house that Fred and Edwina Rogers were murdered in was actually demolished in 1972, 7 years after their murders. And today, this case is still unsolved. In the eyes of the law, it's still unsolved. However, it's pretty much to believe that Charles Rogers did kill his parents. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think Charles had something to do with it? What do you think happened to Charles after the murders? I personally think that he probably did have something to do with it, because the fact that his parents were found dead and then he was never seen or heard of again is just really shifty to me. But yeah, that is everything that I could find on this case. As always, if you think that I've missed something out, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm sorry if this video has been a little bit on the shorter side. I feel like a lot more people prefer longer cases. However, I've got a case coming next week that is going to be very long. I've been working on next week's case for quite a while and it's almost finally done, so it should be out next week. And yeah. Also, quickly before I go, I'm going to be leaving a little poll in this video, either this side or that side, I'm not sure which side it is, but I want to know if you guys prefer unsolved cases or solved cases, because I'm always really intrigued. I'm going to keep doing a little bit of both on this channel, however, I'm always really intrigued as to whether people prefer solved cases or unsolved cases. I personally prefer solved cases, but I want to know what you prefer, so please do vote in the poll. Like I said, it will be up here somewhere. But yeah, that is everything I had to say. I think I will see you for my next true crime video, and like I said, it's going to be a long one, so stay tuned for that. Bye.